is that, as many of you know, we released our second solicitation for environmental justice projects a couple of months ago, and that solicitation has since closed, but we saw a lot of great interest. So I'm sure many of you were spreading the word or even applied yourselves, and just thank you so much for all of your support in that. We're looking forward to going through that process again. And then also a couple of other ways you can stay in touch with the program. Of course, you all found your way here today, and maybe some of you found your way here through our newsletter that we send out every month. If you are not subscribed to our newsletter, I'll put the link in the chat so you can view the latest edition and join and subscribe there if you want to see the latest news. We share NASA news and also other news going on in the environmental justice community. Another note is that we are going to be recording this webinar. I'm not sure if the recording has started just yet, but once we do record, we're going to be sharing this webinar on our new YouTube playlist. So within the NASA channel on YouTube, we'll have a playlist for all of our environmental justice webinars from going forward. That'll be posted, I think, within the next week or so. Finally, I just wanted to mention that we are going to be at a couple of upcoming conferences, and we think this could be a cool opportunity to connect with many of you when we can actually see you in person. So, for example, we'll be at the National Adaptation Forum this year in May, which is in St. Paul, Minnesota. If you could put in the chat, maybe just to introduce yourselves, what your name is, perhaps where you work or why you're here, for example. And then if you're going to be at any of these upcoming conferences in the next couple of months, let us know what they are so we can see if we'll interact with anybody in person there. I think that's everything. So feel free to use the chat to ask any questions throughout, because we'll have time for questions and discussion at the end. And thank you all so much for being here. Thanks, Sabrina.
Thank you, Sydney. That's great. So please make sure to put that information in the chat for us. So as you know, a key component of the work that is being conducted under the Equity and Environmental Justice Program is knowledge co-production to address those environmental issues that are facing our EJ and underserved communities with the help of earth science and geospatial information. So during our webinar, we really want to encourage discussion on the practice of co-production. We have invited two speakers today. Our first speaker is Mary Williams. She is Director of Community and Student Engagement at the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice. And Director Williams has graciously accepted our invitation to speak and to expand our knowledge of the Communiversity Model. This is a model that Dr. Nathan Morrow and Dr. David Paget introduced to us during one of our webinars last fall. I believe it was the one in September. It was our kickoff webinar. She has over 20 years of environmental advocacy experience based on the Communiversity Model to address environmental and climate justice concerns among universities and communities in the Southeast region. And we have invited Director Williams to help us reflect and to learn from best practices for instilling equitable partnerships. So thank you so much, Director Williams, for joining us, and I'll let you take it away.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Hello, everyone. So I want to first start out by saying this amazing Communiversity model that I'll be sharing with you was developed by my executive director and founder of the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice, Dr. Beverly Wright. So about the Communiversity model. So the essence of the Communiversity model is an acknowledgement that for effective research and policymaking, valuable community life experiences regarding environmental insight must be integrated with the theoretical knowledge of academic educators and researchers within a non-threatening environment. So you'll see the Communiversity model to the right, where you have, there's academic knowledge, theories, and concepts, and that's coming from all of our researchers from academic environments, in particular our historically Black colleges and universities. That community experience with our community-based organizations, those partnerships that we have established over the years, and a non-threatening environment. And that equals effective research and policy. And so that non-threatening environment basically means that everybody comes to the table at the same playing field. There's no hierarchy in this Communiversity model. Everybody comes with a level of experience and knowledge. So that Communiversity model, this university partnership model, so it sets guidelines and establishes processes for ensuring an equal voice in the partnership among community members and academic researchers. So it incorporates citizen science, community-based participatory research, research to action methodologies. It fully embraces the environmental justice principle. We speak for ourselves. This is the bedrock of self-determination. This is critical to the work that we do. So the integrity of the design, much care is taken to be true to the model to safeguard the integrity of the work undertaken by the consortium. And that consortium is our HBCU CBO Gulf Coast Equity Consortium. So we believe that HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, working with these communities within the parameters of the Communiversity model, the academicians respecting the knowledge and valuing the experiences and input of communities and engaging them in the research as true working partners. This leads to strengthened communities. So the ultimate goal, communities will increase their impact and build their capacity to affect change that improves the health and well-being of their children and families. Better communities, the HBCU CBO Gulf Coast Equity Consortium is designed with the aim of leaving each community better than they were when they joined the consortium. So the way that we operationalize the Communiversity model, there are 6 operational components. We have program development, community engagement, research, education and training, evaluation, and we have an advisory board. So that program development, it provides administrative leadership and oversight for the consortium. We foster coordination and integration and synergy among the collaborative partners, the administrative, community, and research teams, and clusters and research projects. We support communication, collaboration, and participation within and between participants by fostering new and nurturing established relationships. We establish community priorities and set the direction for future activities. And we monitor the consortium's activities to ensure that it adheres to the goals of the project. And then that community engagement, 1 team per HBCU CBO partnership. So it's composed of a community faculty lead. And so that faculty researcher will help that CBO representative and whatever established community environmental priority that they have, and then that collaborative organization and agency representative. So that CBO may also want to collaborate with a city, a local city entity, or a state entity as well. And then we have the research clusters are formed. And we have 1 cluster per HBCU CBO partnership. And each of those clusters is composed of a CBO representative hired to work as part of a research team. And the HBCU faculty research lead, the collaborative organization, and agency representatives. So we have the education and training. The science literacy training, we have selected community residents who will be trained on environmental issues. And of course, again, this is their priority issues facing their communities. And then we have the train the model. As they're being trained, they'll be able to train other residents within their community. And this helps to perpetuate the continued education of other community residents. And I'll give you an example of this particular education and training. We have found with especially the Gulf Coast communities that we're working with, many of them had the priority of flooding and flood risk within their communities. So we have done extensive training in flood risk with these communities, and they've been trained and learning how to read those FEMA flood maps, and actually have been able to communicate with the local officials, just finding out what the priorities are within their community. Is it in the budget line as it relates to hazard mitigation and flood risk within their communities? So they've been able to have established those conversations with their local officials. And then the Deep South Center also, we have a component of environmental health and safety training. So again, with many disasters that's happening throughout these Gulf Coast communities, the DSCEJ has worker training programs operating in 5 communities. The community residents are trained in the field of hazardous waste remediation as a career, and in particular for the Environmental Career Worker Training Program. These community-based organizations are able to identify that underserved community, the community residents who may not have a job or skill set, and they are trained through our Environmental Career Worker Training Program. And then the community residents, businesses, institutes, and local government agencies will be trained in hazardous waste remediation based on specified needs. So that's another component of our worker training program, where it might be a government entity or business who also wants to learn about health and safety training. Then we have our evaluation process. So we work with the CBOs, research cluster lead, program manager, for community engagement, and to produce a quantitative and qualitative evaluation of the project that the CBO has selected. And so the evaluation instruments will be determined and chosen with the community input, and the instruments will also include surveys. And then we have our advisory board, and that is composed of CBOs, all of these CBOs, one representative from their community-based organization across the Gulf Coast region, and other stakeholders. And so that summarizes how we implement the Communiversity Model at the Deep South Center. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Director Williams. And so I think we have one more speaker, and I will hold all questions until the end, so we have a really good discussion on co-production. So our next speaker is Dr. Patrick Bixler. And oh, sorry, I lost my URL. For some reason, I'm not seeing my. Okay. I lost everyone for a second, sorry. So Dr. Patrick Bixler is assistant professor at the Texas Lyndon B. Johnson School of Public Affairs. He is leading an EEJ project on developing a climate atlas for accountability and advocacy strategies through co-production in the historically underserved community in Austin, Texas, and with the historically underserved community partners in Austin, Texas. He also recently published an article in Frontiers on reflexive co-production. So we have asked him to tell us about this this framework for reflexive co-production to help us create a discussion on best practices for partnering and encouraging positive feedback loops with community organizations. So thank you so much, and take it away.
Hey, sorry about that. That was amazing. Sorry. So, here we go. And is that good on your end? Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you and it looks good.
Okay, awesome. Cool. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Not wanting to leave, I'm wanting to be here. So I'm glad I quickly was able to reconnect. Yep, so I'm Patrick Bixler. I'm a assistant professor in the LBJ School of Public Affairs at UT Austin. And we've kind of been developing this conceptual framework and that we've got to implement and kind of learn from within this NASA-funded project related to reflexive co-production. And so I'm going to both kind of throw out some conceptual sort of jargon and lingo and ways we've been thinking about this, but also try to tie it back into the work we've been doing in Austin. And so a little bit about our project in sort of the overview with the NASA EEJ funding that we do have. Our goal is to integrate Earth system observations with census and survey data. So it's a data integration project with the sort of deliverable being an Austin Climate Atlas and an associated toolkit for community groups to advance advocacy and accountability. And then, sort of getting to these deliverables is this idea that we're applying a reflexive co-production approach. And so what do we mean by this sort of reflexive co-production? Reflexive, this idea of kind of a reflexivity comes from some sociological theory, sociological methodology. I'm a sociologist by training, so when I came across this, it really resonated with me in the way that we think about doing community engaged work. And so by reflexive, we mean this mode of self-observation or critical self-reflection that can help us understand bidimensional system of relations of power and relations of meaning. So it sort of really asks us to question our assumptions with how we understand the world. How do we understand the things that we're studying, the concepts that we're applying, equity and sort of climate impacts and disparate impacts, et cetera. By reflexive, we mean including social learning and experimentation. So there's this adaptive governance, adaptive piece to it. It should be continuous, iterative, and participatory in both the problem definition and goal formulation. So how are we doing this together, this sort of transdisciplinary research process? And then it's a cycle that includes 3 iterative phases, to recognize, to reflect, and to respond. And with co-production, and this is obviously kind of the theme of why we're here today, but this idea that knowledge co-production should support societal change, and that sort of normative objective is embedded within the knowledge generation process. But co-production is also a process to navigate differences, empower voices, reframe power. Co-production takes time, money, takes trust, and it takes follow-through. I assume everybody here understands well that trust takes a really long time to earn, but can dissolve really quickly. And then there's also a critique in the literature around how co-production can reinforce rather than mitigate or transform unequal power relations. And so really kind of centering power and equity and transformation in this process. And so if we want to try to define these 2 key concepts, the reflexive part being a mode of steering, and so that there's some agency in this process, a mode of steering that encourages actors to scrutinize and reconsider underlying assumptions, institutional arrangements, and practices. And then the co-production piece, collaborative knowledge and action-making processes to iteratively address community challenges. At the end of the presentation, I've included kind of a list of references where I'm sort of putting all these ideas together with. And so part of this paper that came out in Frontiers in Sustainable Cities, we define reflexive co-production or describe it by saying it can encourage actors to scrutinize and reconsider underlying assumptions, institutional arrangements, and practices, and move from simply managing this really complicated intersection of equity and urban resilience towards transforming these community, academic, municipal government interactions. And so that there's, we're embedding this within the working relationships, the co-production that's taking place between researchers at the university, community groups, and city agency staff. And I want to add a third piece as we've kind of progressed through thinking through this reflexive governance process. It's kind of become clear that this additional piece, if we're really trying to think about the steps towards transformation and how we're questioning each other's assumptions in the same space, I'm starting to think about how this notion of triple loop learning comes into play. And when we talk about triple loop learning, we're talking about how to learn together, and what that means, with the aims of changing broader visions or purposes, or sort of goals. Double loop learning is starting to recognize patterns over time. And single loop learning is typically what we think about when we think about learning, changes made to specific knowledge, attitudes, and practices. And so you can imagine when a diverse group of actors, including academic researchers, community groups, and city agencies, come in and we're discussing things, there's different types of learning sort of along these different loops that are taking place. And so just some examples that I want to share from our work. I think part of what we're doing here is this idea of integrating Earth systems observations to advance community community aims, community advocacy goals, and accountability within the city. And so this idea of single loop learning, I think, permeated early work that we were doing with this project, with the assumption from our side that recognizing meant researching disparate impacts on underserved communities. And so a lot of this research and some of what I'm showing here kind of came out in the course of this project, which really does identify the historically underserved parts of Austin as being more exposed to flooding, being more cut off from services during floods, more exposed to heat hazard, sort of less mitigation happening in historically underserved communities. And so we're identifying these disparate impacts, both the impact piece and where resources are being deployed. But as we sort of do this learning together and we start to reflect, we realize some assumptions that we're bringing to the table that are hindering our ability to really move the project forward. And so, for example, the community knows there are disparate impacts and that these disparate impacts have already been documented. And the community groups that we're working with aren't necessarily convinced that additional evidence will instigate change with the city. And so part of this kind of conversation is around, we already have this information. We already know this through our lived experience. And so part of what you're doing here, trying to integrate satellite observations, feels like a waste of time to us. Maybe not quite that blunt, but you get the picture. And then I think there was a sort of a kind of a double loop learning of understanding some patterns about how about the assumptions that we're bringing for the role of satellite observations, and even exactly what we mean by this. And so that we found during these kind of conversations and workshops we've been having with community members and community groups, a desire for kind of real-time updates, real-time information, in types of tools that remote sensing applications aren't able to provide. And so there's this kind of disconnect around how we think it is valuable to use it and apply it in models and to visualize sort of spatially the change that's happening in Austin, and the community is kind of seeking this different need based on their assumptions of the tools that we're using. So that was kind of in the Earth system research realm. We're also doing some policy research where we've taken all the city council resolutions from 2010, starting in 2010 and up to the present. All the council resolutions related to extreme weather events, and sort of trying to document what are the inputs and drivers of these resolutions, and what are the actions that the council is asking folks to take. And so we found we found some really clear patterns in both kind of across time, but then also across hazard area, and that flooding in particular seems to be the most referenced hazard with specific actions. Some of those are very geospatially specific in the communities that we're working in. And then we sort of see kind of drought, heat wave, wildfire, freeze. And we do see that these do follow kind of patterns of shocks. It's a little bit harder to pick up any signal with longer term stressors such as heat in general, but drought, flooding are kind of following these periods of time where we're experiencing these shocks. And I think some of the insight here that we're trying to kind of put together is thinking about how do we respond? How do we engage in double loop learning of understanding patterns of the inputs into these policies and the types of actions that are being proposed? And how do we think about hazard-specific strategies for advocacy based on the information that we're putting together, the data we're putting together, that can specifically target specific agencies that are responsible for responding to some of these city council resolutions with changes in some kind of rules and policies at the agency level, maybe not at the city level. So we're kind of engaged in this kind of response and double loop learning phase. And then we're working towards this Austin Climate Atlas, and there's been a tremendous amount of questioning the assumptions about what we mean and think an atlas should be and the types of information it should include. And through this kind of design process, it's been an interesting journey to kind of understand how to learn together, and really kind of walk through this user interface experience about the kinds of information and the desired application, and how this could be tied to an advocacy toolkit, and over the longer term, connecting that to accountability mechanisms and sort of procedures that we can sort of hold the city to. And so I think sort of at the end of this, we're going to kind of end with a definition that looks a little bit like this: a mode of steering that encourages actors to reflect on underlying assumptions, institutional arrangements and practices for collaborative knowledge, and action making towards developing new strategies for learning together for institutional change. And so I think emphasizing this learning together piece and doing that in the service of institutional change. How do we really drive systemic change, and can we do that by questioning the assumptions we're bringing to this work together, and then learning how to learn together. So yeah, excited for this discussion that's about to happen, and more than happy to field any questions offline if you want to connect with me. And then I'll share these slides and just some of the resources around co-production and reflexivity and triple loop learning. It's kind of guiding some of our thinking.
Great. Thank you so much for that presentation to you both. As Cindy mentioned, we are able to unmute you if you raise your hand. So, if you have a question or a comment or just a reaction to the presentations, please make sure to raise your hand or to note your question in the chat box for us. Not seeing anything at the moment. I wanted to ask Director Williams about this aspect of learning together, since the Communiversity Model has this component for citizen science and for education. And so I'm just wondering, in the past 20 years of your advocacy work, what has worked, what has hindered your processes?
Yes, thank you for that, Sabrina. It has really been an amazing journey in working with these communities. And this has been since the inception of our center, 30 plus years. And so coming to the table, having these advisory board meetings and listening to some of the issues and concerns of our communities, and using this Communiversity Model approach has actually been very successful. To give you an example of one community that we work with in the New Orleans area, sort of a David and Goliath situation where the community was fighting an energy company, a local energy company, who wanted to build a gas plant within about a mile and a half of vulnerable communities. And so these community-based organizations have rallied together, and we've been able to help them. One of the things that's really important to this work is following the data and making sure there are data-driven solutions to these problems. And so working with some of the local HBCU schools within that community, we found that this particular plant would it would be poor air quality, certain types of chemicals that would be polluted in the community. The infrastructure would be compromised near the community as well. And so rallying the community together, and they coming together and actually being able to have this data to show, come before the city council and some of the other local officials to show them that this was not a good idea for their community. It was already an EJ, an environmental justice community prior to that, and it would just exacerbate the problems that they were already having.
And so thank you for that example. And so in that process, when was, the science literacy aspect of it? Where does this training occur?
Yeah, so we have in person, and of course since COVID, virtual trainings. And once the community establishes what their issue and concern is, then we identify that subject matter expertise with our HBCU partners, and or if it's within our own organization, and we invite those communities to participate in those trainings that we have. And this is giving them the tools that they need to speak for themselves, which is really critical. We give them the tools and the instruments, and they do a phenomenal job speaking for themselves.
And we have a question from Mara Freilich. She says, I'm interested in hearing more about the career pathways aspect of your approach. You mentioned sanitation careers. How successful has this been in terms of job placements, and are there requests to have other types of job trainings and or pathways to academic jobs?
Is that for me?
Is that for, yeah, let me see. Or I believe this was for Mary.
It is for me.
I think so, yes.
Okay, yes. So we have a wonderful career worker training program. And one of the things that has been helped to develop the communities and that we are partnering with is to help to provide a skill set for those folks in those vulnerable communities. And so in New Orleans, in Pensacola, Florida, in Houston, Texas, and in Detroit, Michigan as well, we have our environmental career worker training program where we target the underserved community. And it's 18 or older young men and women learning a skill set in environmental remediation, asbestos abatement, mold remediation. And we use what we call a holistic approach to training. And so the first 6 weeks is the training where they learning these soft skills and the language of hazard materials and things like that. And then the last 6 weeks is technical training, where there's also a counseling component in the first 6 weeks. So we want to make sure when those students finish the program that they not only have the technical skills, but they have the relational and soft skills to not only get the job, but to maintain a job. It has been very successful. We have a 90% placement rate. Our training program is not successful until we actually place these young men and women. It's been very successful. We have several success stories of our young people not only finishing the program and getting gainful employment, but some have also started their own businesses, pest control businesses and the like. So it has been, and this has been close to 29 years that we've been doing that training.
Thanks. Okay, and thanks, Mara, for the confirmation that was for Mary. So we have another question from Fiona Summers, and this is for you both. Hi, thank you both so much for your presentations. I currently work with master's program, so there is limited time our students have with their community partners. How have you navigated some of the time constraints of the semester academic calendar? How do you ensure that the relationships you have built with community organizations and peoples are sustainable and long-lasting? So I'll ask Patrick to answer this first.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and it's a tough question because students, particularly master students, have a lot of demands on their time, and in a short time, in the big scheme of things, a short time that they're sort of in the community often. You know, I think part of that sustainability piece is paying our community partners. I mean, there's lots of different ways, and it is a constant challenge administratively, logistically, to figure out how to pay community partners. But figuring out ways to compensate community partners for their time, so that really kind of creates a little bit of kind of the longer lasting sustainability type relationships. You know, with this NASA award and other kind of other NSF and other awards, community partners are co-PIs on the projects. And you know, so that sort of is a way to institutionalize those relationships, and oftentimes that institutionalization can kind of change the nature of those relationships. We've experienced that too. I think with, you know, sort of the community workshops that we have, we typically have them during the week, scheduled months in advance, and over a kind of a lunch period. So we sort of have lunch, and that's often an opportunity for the students to come and get exposed to the work, get to know the community partners. I think with a lot of the project-based work we're doing here, it's very rarely a graduate student working with a community partner on their own. So it is definitely more of a team effort. Although we do have some other programs where master students are on a one-on-one basis with community partners. This is a slightly different context, but in that context, we offer these semester stipends to the graduate students, and they often will come back for kind of multiple semesters working with these organizations. And so I think there are some kind of strategies and sort of tricks, and a lot of that comes to how we compensate people that we've learned. And then there's just really a ton of institutional barriers to do this work in a way that is kind of equitable and sort of reduces the friction. There's just a lot of conversations around the university with other researchers, and I'm sure this is happening at all universities, around the logistics and sort of administrative pieces to doing community engaged research.
Yes, and I would agree with Patrick in compensating those community-based organizations, those partners and those students. That is really critical to sustaining those relationships. So the Deep South Center is based in New Orleans, and you know we're known for our food. So that has been a great way when we have our meetings. They're hosted in New Orleans, and we feed them well. But also because of the stories that you hear, you really have to empathize with the challenges that these communities are going through, and be a good listener. And that's how you are building those relationships with those community-based, those partners. Because it's a partnership, hearing their stories and just doing everything you can to try to help them to overcome those challenges. And with our students, we have several opportunities for our students to engage with these communities. We have a summer internship program every year where we have the students immersed in some of those priority projects that the communities are working on, and these are paid internships. We also have an annual HBCU climate change conference where we have these students doing the research, but also those community-based organizations who were there. And so there's these networking opportunities annually for the CBOs to get to know these students who are interested in the work, but also for the students to get to know what these community partners are doing as well. So we're going on our 10th year anniversary of our HBCU Climate Change Conference. And it's been amazing. So many of those students beyond, once they graduate from college and even into graduate school, some way stay connected with us. We actually had a panel of some students, our HBCU students. Where are they now? The students who actually said that their experience at the HBCU Climate Change Conference impacted their career path, their environmental career path. And many of them are either working on their PhD or have graduated and working in academia or a environmental nonprofit organization. So we have seen those sustainable relationships over the years. So it's been very impactful for the communities as well as the students.
It's wonderful. So great food and good listening lead to success. So we have a question from Dana Thompson. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, Dana. Okay. Dana, are you there? Okay, Dana. Now I unmuted you.
Can you hear me?
You're a little soft.
Okay, I'll speak up. I have thoroughly enjoyed the session. Thank
It's
you
really
so
hard
much.
to hear you. Can you get closer, perhaps?
Certain
Can
breeds.
you move here?
Is this any better?
Yes, that's much better. There you go.
Okay. Thank you so much for this session. I was double booked, and so I'm so sad that I missed part of the first presentation, because this was the second one absolutely resonated with a bunch of work that I'm doing. So I have a question for each person. As someone who has come from the kind of co-production of data with diverse stakeholders around in the quote unquote slum mapping world, so we have many different mapping traditions, from community-based mappers, city and local governments, humanitarian sector, and academia, all doing various kinds of slum models and maps and trying to integrate those. We have this kind of global idea that it's possible to do this kind of bottom-up process, but somehow develop globally comparable outputs to some degree. And I'm just curious, because there is this kind of division of top-down versus bottom-up data production, how you both see this. Like, do you think there is a way for these kind of global data products? Maybe they're imperfect at local scales. Maybe they don't serve all use cases. But do you see a vision? Do you have a vision for that? And what does that look like kind of institutionally? And I'm imagining that it involves a network of networks. You know, if the Deep South Center is a regional network, then the Deep South Center can also kind of on a meta level also interact with other similar types of institutions, maybe in other regions. And I'm not sure if you even have the bandwidth to do that or if there's value to that. But I'm just curious if you guys have any reactions to that in a vision for what that looks like.
Patrick, did you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think two things come to mind, and it really resonates just sort of with our own experiences. That I guess, and I haven't thought about it quite through that lens, that tension between the top down and the bottom up, in the tension between the global data sets and the lived experience, and how do you sort of, right, kind of like what maybe is needed is a template that can be replicated, that sort of identifies and deals with those tensions. And how do we, and then I think what you said is super important, particularly in the context of this like triple loop learning. How do we start to change systems? And I think part of changing systems is linking those, sort of linking via network or regional hubs, or sharing experiences that are translocal, right? So how do we move from this embedded understanding of the work that we're doing in a place, and sharing those lessons learned, with others, in kind of that learning process. So I don't think, I think I learned more from your question than you probably learned from my answer. But this idea of kind of the top down, bottom up tension, I think really resonates with the work we're doing. And I think there is a desire, and it's certainly an assumption that we as researchers brought to this process, that these global data sets can be applied in a way that sort of creates an atlas that identifies important disparate impacts of current and future climate. And it's not quite that straightforward when we're looking at it from the bottom up.
Okay. Yeah. When I think about that, one of our approaches to our training that we do with the community partners, we have one of our faculty mentors who is a geologist, and he does a lot of GIS mapping. What is great about it is, I'll give you, for example, flood risk mapping. It's interactive, where he's training those community partners how to actually do the mapping, FEMA, reading those maps, finding flood risk within their own communities, and the results that they're getting for themselves within their community, within their zip code. They're able to use that mapping to bring to stakeholders and city officials. One of the things that we have also, and we're really thankful to NASA and how you are approaching communities now. And we actually had a session last year with some of the representatives from NASA, talking to some of our community partners about some of the issues that they are having. And that approach is really important. And they were able to share some things that maybe folks are not talking about as it relates to what were some of the things that we talked about. We talked about where there are a lot of landfills in places like that, and identifying those landfills, or places where there's a lot of debris and things like that after storms, and identifying those issues, and just ways of showing where those issues are, and being able to come up with solutions. So that's a way of, I think NASA is really working hard to not have this top down, but folks coming and meeting in the middle to come up with these solutions. And that's the approach that we've had in our training, in that many of the trainings that we conduct, we try to make them as interactive as possible, where our partners, our community partners, are able to understand this mapping. Another, for example, is community asset mapping, where residents, again, are trained how to identify the assets that's within their community, to prove to folks who may not value their community to invest in their community.
So much. So we are, of course, 6 minutes until the end of our discussion. Unfortunately, we do have 2 more questions. So maybe we can try the first one for Director Williams. Do you provide stipends to the adults participating in the career pathways training? And do you offer opportunities for graduates to come back as trainers in the program?
Great questions. So the first answer is yes, they do get weekly stipends to participate in the training. We understand that many of these students who participate in the training, some of them, are working, and they may have to quit their current job because it's 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. So it's not a lot, but we do offer weekly stipends for the 12-week period. So absolutely, we ensure that. And again, there's a 90 to 95% chance when you graduate from our program that you will get a good job, a sustainable job we want you to get a job that will help you to sustain your family. And there was another question. What was the other question?
Second, so do you provide stipends to the adults participating in the career pathways training?
Okay, I think I answered that.
Oh, sorry. Do you offer opportunities for graduates to come back as trainers in the program?
Yes, that's another really good question. And we have, yes, as a matter of fact, we have had several to come back and train in the program, and we encourage that. And it's really an inspiration to the current students who are participating in the program to see, their peers doing well and training. And it's actually, they learn better from their peers many times. So yes and yes to both of those questions.
Thank you. And so this question is from Fiona Summers for both of you. We'll start with Patrick. What does it mean for the future of scientific research if we are recognizing the issues of objectivity and recognizing the importance of reflexivity and positionality in research?
It's a big question that aligns with my conceptual heavy presentation. Yeah, I'm inspired by what I see at higher levels of an institution like the University of Texas, which traditionally has been very natural science, geoscience type focused, and there is a real emphasis on doing this kind of community engaged research, and I institutional change is really slow, and that it sort of applies to institutions across the board. But I do get the sense that the students we're training are really hungry to do action-oriented sort of research, and not just something that's published. And I think we're seeing that at the top too. There are increasingly kind of incentives and openness to try to break through some of these barriers that have really been persistent. I mean, for example, if we're trying, and gets to that paying piece, if we're trying to contract with a community organization, we treat them as a private sector contractor for their services. And so it seems like there could be some rather simple kind of policy changes at the higher education institutional level that can make some of this work a little bit easier. Kind of went on a tangent there, but
I get it.
yeah. But I think I'm really hopeful that a model of researching in researchers is developing that does consider this positionality into the nature of the questions we're asking, even in the hard sciences. We're working very closely with many geosciences that are very engaged in this work.
Yeah, I definitely could understand what you were saying, Patrick. So you guys may not know. So the Deep South Center actually started at an institution. We were at Xavier University. After Hurricane Katrina, we moved to Dillard University. And so we've only been on our own as a nonprofit for the past 7 years. Game changer is all I can tell you. Being able to replicate our work, not all the red tape that you have to deal with at an institution. So I definitely get what you're saying, Patrick. And so I want to say this. We started the work along the Louisiana-Mississippi River Chemical Corridor, that 85-mile stretch, Cancer Alley. After Katrina, Gulf Coast region, we are actually national now. We work with community-based organizations across the country now. We have been able to expand and replicate our work, that Communiversity Model.
Thank you so much for that. It has been wonderful to have you both here today. Thank you so much for the discussion. I'm sure we could go on. You know, we did share the link to Patrick's publication, and there's a great discussion as well on indicators and measuring success of different, I guess, different methodologies for co-production. And I'm sure we could expand on that as well, maybe in the future. Mary, if there's any other resources perhaps that we could share on the Communiversity model, I'd be happy to share with everyone. And thank you so much to everyone. I think one of the things that we do want to get your feedback on is on when we host these webinars, whether we should host them in every month or perhaps quarterly. So if you have input on that, please let us know. But we are at the top of the hour, and I'm very thankful for both of our speakers today. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
And thank you for sharing the link.
Bye-bye,
Have a good
everyone.
one.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.